This clip is brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com. Edwards wants to know, was Arn sad that Jim Crockett Promotions went out of business?
Yeah, if he'd have made a couple of the right decisions, he'd still be in business.
I guess the gist of the question is, knowing that you and he disagreed on payoffs and ultimately had a pretty major falling out, one that essentially had you wind up working for Vince. Was it bittersweet, a little bit when that all comes to a close and Turner buys it out? Or were you inside going, all right, serves him right?
I'd have never left him, Conrad. If he'd have treated me the right way at the very end when it was the most important, I'd have never left him. Totally would have never left him. Just real briefly, other than the personal things that caused us to go over the edge and leave and, make that decision to get out of there. If you back way up, and I knew it at the time, when the company purchased Kansas City territory and purchased Bill Watts territory, it was right then was the beginning of the end. They had overextended themselves. And what did they really buy?
Right.
TV slots. It was dead territory.
Yeah.
Kansas City had been long dead and buried. Bill Watts territory, dead and buried. With TBS, we could have went in there and just ran it anyway off of TBS and ran all of those towns. There was nothing to buy. But Jim Crockett, in those days, there was like this bond between the NWA promoters. If you went in and ran a town that was another company's, or another territory's town, there was a kickback to the people that owned that territory. If you ran their town, they got part of the gate. It was an understood deal. And there was this bond between those guys. So Jimmy felt like he had to pay Watts. And I don't know if it was Bob Geigel or who he paid for Kansas City, but we heard stories of millions of dollars that he spent to buy nothing.
Right.
That was the biggest mistake and the downfall of Jim Crockett Promotions. When he purchased those darn money it cost. All those guys had to move out there, especially Kansas City. They all moved out there. They weren't making any money. It was like it was a startup wrestling company.
Right.
And it wasn't the A team. No disrespect to anybody they sent out there, but you look at the cards, it was a B-town B card. And the fans knew it because they would see the advertisement on TBS. You remember, tonight in Orlando, Florida. Also, Sumter, South Carolina. Those advertisements that went down on TBS, they knew they weren't getting the A product. And that was, I think, the beginning of the end of Jim Crockett. But no, I didn't take any gratification. When he closed, I knew it was the end of an era, and it was the greatest time business-wise that I'd ever had. I'd bought a home. I'd furnished it. I'd had a child, had a couple of nice cars sitting out in the driveway, and my wife was able to fix that house up like she wanted, even though it was just another small house. It was something we could afford. And, life was good for me in those 3 years. And it kind of started me into success and my manhood. Everything was achieved. My ability as a talent was groomed during that period.
It is pretty remarkable and puts it all in context when you say that too. Those 3 years, because that's what it was. 85 to 86, 86 to 87. And of course, 87 to 88. And then you're out of there. But man, you talk about what an impact it made, because here we are all these years later, still talking about it so fondly. It's 36 months. I mean, we talk about WWE from 2017 to now, and that doesn't seem like any time at all. That seems like yesterday, but 3 years, that's the extent of your Crockett run.
But you got to remember too, that was every day, 7 days a week.
Right.
Which makes those 3 years a lot bigger.
I don't mean to beat a dead horse here, but we have talked about, the payoff from Crockett, and obviously you took that personally it's become a famous meme from Michael Jordan this year. But now that we know more about the real financial circumstance of the Crockett's and that they were about to be bankrupt themselves. I mean, they were looking for a major lifeline just to keep from filing bankruptcy because they had overextended themselves way too much. Do you give Crockett any leeway that it wasn't necessarily, and you may disagree, but from my perspective, he didn't have a choice. He probably would have loved to have paid you more, but there just wasn't any money. I don't think this is a story like, earlier this year, people were critical of WWE laying off a bunch of folks when they're having the most profitable year. That was not the circumstance for Crockett in '88. He's fighting for his life. He's about to lose his company. He's about to maybe face bankruptcy. So when he doesn't pay you, it's not a matter of, well, I got the cash, I'm just not going to give it to Marty. It's a matter of, he probably just didn't have it. Do you agree?
Who's Marty?
Oh, sorry. Mr. Anderson.
Oh, that's me. The mistake he made was coming to me, grabbing me by the wrist. You got a minute? And taking me in the shit house and saying, Arn, you've been a real soldier. You've been one of my top guys. You've worked your ass off. I want to reward you. I'm going to pay you $25,000 on this coming pay-per-view. I don't know that that's ever happened in history before or since. I never heard of it where a promoter takes you in and just volunteers without me saying a word to him, totally unsolicited. This is what we're going to pay you. I went home and told my wife that, and once our jaws got off the ground, can you imagine what went through her head along his mind? Do you know how much money that is to us, and especially at that time?
Right.
He set us up for the biggest letdown financially of our life. We've never been that disappointed about anything else because Jim Crockett said it, he volunteered it, it must be true. And then to not give it to you is bullshit. If he had never said anything,
right,
I would have looked at that payoff that I got and went, damn, that's a pretty damn good payoff.
Right.
That'd be in half of it. That was the mistake that he made with me. He set me up for a huge fall that was unnecessary because he had to know by then it was going to be hit and miss.
Now, I don't know when that conversation had, but I think but I think we're still talking about Starrcade 87, the pay-per-view that Vince McMahon single-handedly torpedoed, right?
For some reason, I want to think it was the one that was the pay-per-view that we had in up in New York.
Oh, so it was the bunkhouse deal, which he, again, counter-programmed with the Royal Rumble for free on USA. My point is, I think in order to be, and listen, we're going to get beat up about this no matter what, but I'm glad we're having the discussion. We'll get to more questions later or in 2 weeks because this is good stuff. But hypothetically, I think in order to be a promoter, you've got to be an optimist. Like there aren't pessimistic promoters, because if you're a negative promoter, you'd never put your own money on the line and hope that people are going to come. You'd come up with all the reasons it wouldn't work and you'd never run a show. So you've got to be a bit of an optimist. And I just assume that after he felt like if it was the bunkhouse show, okay, Vince got over on me on this Starrcade show, totally killed my pay-per-view, but now I know the pay-per-view companies are on my side. They're not letting him pull that bull. And I'm going to get to run my real pay-per-view show in January unopposed. And then of course he got backdoored and Vince gave away the Royal Rumble, invented the Royal Rumble, and then gave it away for free on the USA Network to torpedo the second straight pay-per-view. He's probably at a loss for, how do I turn a profit here? I mean, clearly he's about to lose his company too. I wonder when that conversation was had, if he knew he was going to be counter-programmed, if he really was well-intentioned and best-intentioned, and then the money just wasn't there. Not because the show wasn't interesting or wasn't good or he didn't have his best efforts, but because Vince McMahon counter programmed him and once again had that trump card of, oh, you got a pay show? Well, I'll do a free one. Same time. Let's see who wins.
Okay. All he would have had to have done, again, like I said, I would have never left him. Come to me, say, I spoke too soon. Let me tell you what happened.
He didn't do that, you're saying?
No.
Okay. Well, that's the difference. If we're going to be transparent and you're going to be forthright and you can come have a conversation and say, no, Arn, when we talked, this is what I had in mind. Here's what Vince has done to us. Here was my projection. Here's what it actually was. I want to take care of you as best I can, but there's nothing left here.
Please stick with me.
Yeah.
If he would have said, please stick with me. I gave him 3 years of my life, Conrad, and there's not a day, 336 days, was a count maybe in 86 or 87 of days. That doesn't mean matches. We had 2 matches on Saturday, sometimes 2 on Sunday. I don't know how many matches, but I gave that company everything I had. It was part of the most successful thing that they've ever had in their existence. They can hang their hat on the Four Horsemen, period. Forget all the other stars. Will you just take that alone? We made our contribution and we went out there every single night and busted our ass. No questions asked. Whatever you needed, we were there. A 5-minute conversation like you just laid out, and I would have never left.
Do you think, and listen, this is a Vinceism, but we've heard from Bruce over the years on his pod, Something to Wrestle, that Vince never lets them see never let them see you sweat. Don't sell it, pal. So if business is bad and, the XFL just lost billions of dollars, he's at work the next day doing what he would normally do, like nothing happened. Do you think part of being a promoter is you don't focus on the negativity and maybe to sit down and admit he was licked by Vince McMahon to you just wasn't in him? Or did you take it as just, and I think this is normal, incredibly disrespectful that you say one thing and then you do another and there's no explanation. So even if you could sort of put 2 and 2 together, if he's not man enough to come explain that to me, or doesn't think that I deserve that, I'm out of here.
Per the conversation that he had to set it up when he told me what he was going to give me.
Yeah.
He got the most personal with me that he had ever gotten. Jimmy, if you've been around him, is just stoic.
Mm-hmm.
I never got to know Jimmy Crockett. I don't think anybody that worked for him got to know him with the exception of Dusty and Rick.
Yeah.
The real Jimmy Crockett. The fact that he didn't offer me a word after bringing me in and setting me up, I just felt like it wasn't worth his time to have to explain himself. Now, the guy that he said he had to have, please stay with him. I'm rewarding you for all these years of faithful service. It went from that to just not having the time or inclination to take 5 minutes and tell me what happened. And I damn sure wasn't going to go to him and ask.
Right.
I just said, okay, if that's the way it really shook out and that's where I'm at on the priority list, adios.
It's a shame that ego tore it down like that. Since we're so deep in the weeds on this one topic, you've told the story before when you go in and give notice in Philadelphia, you and Tully do after you've just met with Vince, you're going to drop the belts to the Midnights and you communicate that to Dusty. And it was like water off a duck's back to Dusty. You looked up to Dusty. You had done big business with him, but Dusty probably knows, hey, we're in a bad spot financially here. He's probably more plugged into that than you are. And he's also been in a pretty heated on-screen, and even though it's not popular to talk about, a behind the scenes rivalry and feud with Ric Flair. Ego is a big part of our business, of course, your business, as they say. Chat me up. Did you feel like when Dusty doesn't have a bigger response that you had certainly made the right decision? I mean, he knew Jimmy. but you didn't feel comfortable enough, even though you had worked with him and trusted your body with him. You didn't feel comfortable enough to just sit down and have a conversation about, hey man, here's what's going on. They told me it was going to be this, and now it's that. What's the real deal? What's going on with Jimmy? You couldn't really have that type of conversation with Dusty at the time because of your relationship with Rick and his strained relationship with Rick, or what was the dynamic there with you and Dusty when you do give notice?
No, their relationship had nothing to do with it. And by the way, it's our business now. You've earned your way in, kiddo. You can now say it's our business, not your business.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, but JBL hadn't hazed me yet, so I don't know that I'm official. That's a joke.
No, I'm just sitting here in horror of what he had in mind.
I don't want to know.
No, I don't either. So if you get through it and everything somehow down the road, months away, you live, let me know what happened.
I'll do it.
I did respect Dusty, and I was a fan of Dusty's, and I was a mark for Dusty. And Dusty, till the day he died, was a big star in my eyes. And he had, the fact is, Dusty bought me in. He booked me. He kept me booked. He wrote my name down and all those A towns. He was responsible for me making the living that I made, which was damn good. Those 3 years I was at Crockett. More than my wildest dreams. A guy from Rome, Georgia should never make that much money. Even though a lot of guys were making a lot more, I was not lost on the fact that, hey, what are you worth out there in the real market? Not a whole hell of a lot, but you're doing pretty damn good here. The reason I think Dusty had to play hands off is when we did put in our notice. I'm not sure he was 100% that, that night we were going to do what we're going to do, but I'm not sure that after we slept on it, we wouldn't be there the next day and have a conversation with him and go, hey, maybe we were a little hasty. Pretty good spot we're walking out on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Didn't suck. But I think he had to back Jimmy. He had to be strong in the face of unity with Jimmy, I think. They couldn't let the other talent know that it even bothered them that we had left the company, because if they overreacted, what does that make the other talent feel about how they're perceived?
Right.
I think you slight them if he would have overreacted. So I think he handled it in a nonchalant way. Hey, it was probably something like, hey, baby, I'll make more stars. And he meant that. He meant he would. As it shook out, and Tom pretty much told the story, it's not that easy to replace Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson.
No, it is not.
So everybody acted appropriately to what they had to do business-wise. And like I said, the fix could have been very simple.
Well, I'm glad we got to the bottom of it and we got to talk about it in more long form. I've always been fascinated by that Horseman run and that Crockett run that you had. And I don't know, it feels like it was a lot longer than 3 years, and it sort of knocks my socks off to hear you just casually mention that, but you're exactly right. And then to know that it all came to an end based on, essentially, and I've never talked to Mr. Crockett about that, but it feels like it came down to just ego. If he would have just been honest and said, hey man, I want to, but I can't. And here's why. Maybe we could have kept the band together, and it would have been pretty interesting to see what 1989 looked like for you guys there. Not just your side, but the Tully thing. I mean, can you imagine, not to armchair quarterback, but when he leaves, his life is never the same ever again. Like, his career trajectory changed forever. And, a series of events got us there, but leaving was probably step one in that direction, right?
Yep. Yeah. I would suggest, because it eliminates your options. When you leave there, you can't turn around and go right back. Even if they would have stayed in business, you can't go back there. Leaving under those circumstances. It's like when I left WWF at the time, and I went in to have my first meeting with Jim Hurd, and he said, if you're not happy with I understand, I'm gonna cut your money, da 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 da. If you, I understand, or if you're not happy, you want to go back to Vince. That alone tells me, it speaks volumes. He doesn't understand our business. I can't turn around and go back to Vince and went, well, I worked a 90-day notice and did all that, and, left you, but I've changed my mind. Can I come back? That don't happen.
Right.
Oh, yes. Well, you had a change of heart. We'll welcome you back with open arms. I'd have been putting the guy that sweeps up the hot dog wrappers at 2 a.m. in the arenas, I'd have been putting him over 2 straight on TV. That's how you fix that. So when Tully and I left, that eliminated one option of him going back to, because when we left, we didn't know if they were going to file bankruptcy, they were going to be bought. We didn't know what it was going to become. Maybe another option, they were going to get a bailout of some sort. Who knows? But, during that particular time, there wasn't a lot of places you could go and make the money we were making. It was, and Jimmy Crockett could have taken this stance too, Conrad, because I know how the business world is. If he would have looked at me and went, hey, Arn, Jesus Christ, you know how much money you made the last 3 years? You know how much you made a year? Don't you consider that, treating you right? He could have went that slant. I wouldn't have had a leg to stand on. It's the way he handled it. Because every dime of that money I earned, and that would have been my retort. Hey, yeah, I know how much I made. Also know I earned every dime of it.
Yep.
So don't hit me with that bullshit. We earned our money. And it's just one of those things. And it was, like you said with Tully, man, it was the beginning of the end virtually of his time in the business.
It's so crazy to think too. I mean, just recently, Tony Schiavone and I sat down and watched that dreaded Heroes of Wrestling pay-per-view for Mississippi in '99. And Tully worked with Stan Lane there. And Tully was in as good a shape as he ever was before, and cut a promo beforehand that had to be one of the best promos of the year in 1999. And this is a guy who had been out of the business for years at that point. And it all changed. It's such a weird story that Tully has. And it really is a shame, because this is a guy who was a major player inside and outside the ring, and his career was cut short, but we can see him every week now on Wednesday nights on AEW. And we hope you guys are tuning in every week, not only to see Tully, not only to see Arn, but to see JR and Tony and all of our friends here. We're having a lot of fun with this show, and, man, we're home stretching to Christmas, and I'm excited that we got to do these shows this year, Arn. A lot of people were really counting on us to get them through a tough time. It's been a challenging year for a lot of people, and we've been a fun escape. But if I'm honest with you, it's been a fun escape for me this year, just talking old wrestling with you. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.